Yes, and sooner than we think. The situation is so intolerable, so outrageous. The Israeli position is so extreme that I actually believe we will have a breakthrough, not because of Israel changing its attitudes, but because of the world forcing a solution, and that will come sooner than we think.
And do you think that world forcing a solution will come because of violence against Israel?
Well, the violence against Israel is rising and obvious, and is a major threat to Israel, a threat that Israel has fully provoked on its part. So Israel has done extraordinary damage to itself, of course, diplomatically and militarily and in basic security terms. It has isolated Israel entirely in the world community, but for one country that continues, at least to this moment, to back it, and that is the United States. Of course, it's done horrendous harm to the Palestinians, so I don't want to be misunderstood, but it has made so much self-harm, it's astounding.
What do you see happening that would result in Palestinian freedom, and can it possibly happen with the current Israeli government under Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, the U.S. position has been that any solution to the Israel-Palestine crisis must be through a negotiated agreement. But this is a phony idea. It has just meant that Israel has a veto over Palestinian rights. And indeed, the United States has backed up that veto, no matter how outrageous, how murderous, how criminal, and now how genocidal Israel's actions have been. So the U.S. position has, on the surface, had a ring of plausibility that the two sides should negotiate and that the U.S. supports a two-state solution. But Israel manifestly opposes a two-state solution. Even the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, voted formally recently to reject a state of Palestine. So the U.S. position has been to give a veto to Israeli extremism. This is completely intolerable. It has passed the charade of American politics. It, as I said, seems to have a glimmer of plausibility to it. So all of this is to say that a solution needs to be imposed by the United Nations. That means by the UN Security Council, which has the power to impose the two-state solution and to put in peacekeepers, even to put in military enforcement to back the UN Security Council. That's all within the power of the UN Charter. The UN General Assembly can back the call of the 15 members of the UN Security Council by a demonstration of the overwhelming support for the solution by the world community. We're actually not far from that because we are just one veto away. Again, the United States stands as the last sole protector of Israel's genocidal behavior. The U.S. is complicit in a genocide right now. This is understood by young people in the United States. It may increasingly be understood. Whenever I say this, by the way, I get mail from older people who take great exception that I said that. I'm speaking statistically, that on average, the younger people tend to understand this at a higher proportion than older people. But there are many older people, including myself, who see this for what it is. I believe that American politics will not endlessly sustain this horrendous situation, partly because Israeli extremism has become so vulgar, so blatant, so clearly in violation of every standard of decency, every norm, and every piece of international law that, as I say, more and more Americans get this, even in our pretty dim-witted Washington political class. And the international community gets it. And Israel is increasingly vulnerable, strictly on military terms. The U.S. cannot save Israel the way that Israel is going, because Iran is more and more powerful. Hezbollah is powerful. The shocking behavior by Israel is uniting more and more of the Arab world. So Israel has put itself in dire threat.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that the idea of the United Nations organizing, orchestrating, creating, sustaining, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Palestinian freedom is one veto away. Do you really mean one presidential election away? Do you think we would have a different representative with a different attitude if Kamala Harris is president than we do under Joe Biden and would under Donald Trump with respect to the freedom of the Palestinian people?
I'm not sure that the election in the U.S. will make much of a difference per se, but I do think the American deep state has to take note that what is happening in Israel and in the Middle East is adverse to U.S. interests and to global peace. This is not shaping up the way the American deep state wants or expects. Israel itself is far more vulnerable. The United States is far more isolated. American public opinion, which somehow has to be managed through the standard narratives, pablum and lies and so forth, has to be addressed because it is turning strongly against U.S. government policy. So I'm not talking about a particular election result. I'm talking about a change of U.S. longstanding policy because it doesn't work. Eventually, the U.S. changes bad policies. Of course, there's the famous quotation of Winston Churchill that the U.S. always does the right thing after it's tried everything else. And it may be the case in this long-standing conflict, which after all is now 57 years since the 1967 war.
Can we comfortably and with intellectual honesty conclude that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government were never serious about negotiating for a ceasefire for the return of the hostages from the fact that they assassinated the principal Hamas negotiator?
Well, I think that there's a deeper point, which is that that Netanyahu has never given a moment's honest consideration to a state of Palestine. This is the core of his political party, the Likud. It's pretty deep in Israeli politics, period. Israeli politics has become more and more extreme over the years, so it's become more and more true. Now, if you start from the premise that there is going to be no acceptable political solution, that the only solution on offer by Israel is apartheid at the least, ethnic cleansing or genocide in an escalating fashion, then issues like ceasefires become basically impossible because everything is done with the context of where is this heading. Hezbollah or Hamas or others aren't interested in a ceasefire in which they, give the returning hostages just to have Israel resume its genocidal attacks a week or two or a month later. And so everything has the long term cast over it. And the fundamental problem is that the Israeli government, in the most basic and blatant and absolutely unambiguous way, is opposed to anything other than continued Israeli apartheid rule or ethnic cleansing or genocide. And we have people who are so shocking in what they say, like the finance minister, Ben-Gvir, or Smotrich, who together with the interior minister, Ben-Gvir, makes statements that are blatantly calling for genocide, saying it's okay to starve to death 2 million people if they won't return the hostages. And returning the hostages is in a political context in which they say, well, Israel, of course, is going to continue to dominate the Palestinian people. So the core point, Judge, in all of this is that there has been no political perspective or solution on the horizon for one glimmer of a moment. And that's because at the core of Netanyahu's politics and this government's politics, there's a complete rejection, utter and total and unambiguous and unmovable, of Palestinian political rights. Given that, what else is going to occur except continued violence and war? And the United States is a party to all of this. And either Blinken and Sullivan, and God knows if Biden is still alert to any of this, who knows, but they don't acknowledge this basic truth for one moment. And that's what's so sad and pathetic about American policy. You can't negotiate ceasefires and temporary solutions if there's no political prospect in sight.
But Netanyahu does not preside over a liberal democracy, presides over an authoritarian theocracy. And you can't really reason with people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. They favor torture, they favor horrific torture, they favor immunity for the horrific tortures, they favor jailbreaks when their people are arrested and prosecuted, they favor bullets in the head on the theory that they need to have more beds in the jails. I mean, and reason with.
A lot of Israeli society at this point, traumatized, propagandized, followers of extremist beliefs, whatever the various reasons, agrees with this. They don't like Netanyahu as an individual. They don't trust him because he is a crook and fundamentally dishonest. But they don't oppose the ruthlessness of this extremist government. And that's widespread, at least according to the opinion surveys in Israel. This is a complete tragedy and a devastation of a breakdown of the most basic standards in society. Now, what do you do in this context? Of course, you have to impose a solution. First, to protect the Palestinian people, period. Second, because Israel will come to its senses at some time in the future, but not now. It doesn't demonstrate any sense in this. And it's not only Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and the other extremists, though they are the perpetrators, but it is broader Israeli society right now, which is traumatized. It's been propagandized relentlessly. It does not see the context or care about the context. It's been told that this is the Holocaust revisited, or it's been told that this is God's redemptive plan because a lot of the images are biblical from 2,600 years ago. It's such a mess. But this is something that the world community can stop and needs to stop and needs to say, okay, we know what the solution is because there's only one that is on the table, that is on offer, that is possible, practicable, and in line with decades of international law. That is two states living side by side with a wall between them, with peacekeepers between them. They can hate each other, but it's two states living side by side on the June 4th, 1967 borders, with Palestine's capital in East Jerusalem and Palestinian control over the Islamic holy sites. This is the story, and it can be imposed tomorrow by the UN Security Council.
I want to play a short clip for you from the Turkish foreign minister just yesterday and ask you your comments on it. Number 7, Chris.
It is no longer acceptable for America to try to sweep aside and mitigate every evil Israel does. Let them heed our warnings. I say this as the children of the region, as the people of the region. The emotional atmosphere the region is going through, the psychological state of the people, the images of massacres they see on the screen every day, the fact that no help is being extended to the helpless Palestinians. And in the face of this, Muslim countries are constantly being lectured on other unnecessary issues, has long since exceeded the limits of tolerance in terms of democracy and human rights.
Since exceeded the limits of tolerance in terms of democracy and human rights. What do you expect Iran will do, and what do you expect the powers in the region will do in response to the 2 Israeli assassinations, one in Beirut and one in Tehran?
Let me first say that Turkey has a very sophisticated diplomacy. It's not only sophisticated on its own merits, but it reflects a diplomacy of several hundred years of continuity and knowledge in the region. So I have enormous respect for Turkey and its diplomatic skills. By the way, also helping in 2022 to broker peace between Ukraine and Russia that the US and UK then shut down. So when you hear the
I guess Tony Blinken doesn't even know the Turkish foreign minister.
Yes, when you hear the Turkish foreign minister speak in these terms, we should really respect that. This is, I respect any foreign minister speaking, but this is a very serious country with a very serious diplomacy. It's also a NATO member. It should be taken extremely seriously. The irony, of course, about Iran is that Iran has been, let us say, repeatedly patient, quite the opposite of how it's portrayed, as Israel has carried out assassinations, and the most recent assassination, of course, on the very occasion of the inauguration of the new moderate Iranian president. So absolutely, Israel trying to provoke a wider war and assuming that all of those congressmen who stood up and gave Netanyahu the 56 standing ovations will quickly launch into a US-led war against Iran, one that would be utterly devastating and could easily draw in Russia and could easily turn into a world war. But this is what Israel is trying to do. So you ask me what will happen. Israel keeps provoking, and there will be a reaction, and a very dangerous one. What's extraordinary, and why I hold Blinken in such low opinion, is that you hear by the hour how the U.S. is trying to urge moderation of the Iranians. But what about a statement, just one statement publicly about Israel? Blinken is so dishonest that he thinks that we're going to have all this diplomacy with Iran after the U.S. shames attacks Iran repeatedly, watches as Israel attacks Iran, even when Israel attacked Iran's diplomatic mission in Damascus. The U.S. protected Israel by blocking a UN Security Council consideration of that wholly illegal attack, a direct violation of the rules of diplomatic conduct. But the U.S. protected Israel and then went on to deeply criticize Iran when it retaliated. And then they say, oh, we're working with Iran to try to convince them for moderation. Well, it's a disgrace of Blinken that he can't seem to tell the truth or know the truth, perhaps, one moment during his time as Secretary of State. Talk about Israel. Stop Israel's abuse. If you want moderation, start with Israel. Israel is the one that is making